Halloween is known to be one of the most spooky times of the year, filled with frightening sights and entertaining activities related to the fall season. But this time of the year also harbors many creepy mysteries, some remaining unsolved and unexplained. I am Mr. Mysterious, and today we'll be looking into 5 creepy Halloween mysteries. The murder of Chyme Weiss. A 15-year-old Orthodox Jewish boy by the name of Chyme Weiss attended Masitva of Long Beach, a yeshiva high school in New York. The morning after Halloween in 1986, his entire school was horrified when Chyme was found murdered on his dorm room floor. The boy had been bludgeoned to death after a sharp blow to the skull and was then repeatedly stabbed in the head. However, no murder weapon could ever be found anywhere on the premises. Since there was no evidence of a struggle, it seemed very likely that Chyme was killed in bed while he slept before the body was moved out onto the floor. By all accounts, Chyme was very well liked, making it baffling for anyone to think of who could commit such a crime. There were signs that the killer was familiar with the religious customs of Orthodox Judaism. Despite it being a chilly night, the window in Chyme's room was open, a custom which is often done in order to let the deceased person's spirit move out of the location. After the murder, one of the school's rabbis left a memorial candle to burn in Chyme's room. 2 days later, a second candle would appear near the first, though no one would ever admit to putting it there. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere within the dorm room, indicating the killer may have been familiar with the dormitory. During the night, another student on Chyme's floor remembered being momentarily awakened when the door to his room was opened before it was immediately shut again. After 30 years, authorities have never been able to find a suspect or any answers about why Chyme Weiss was murdered in such a brutal fashion. The identity of orange socks. Halloween, 1979. The unidentified body of a young woman was found in a concrete culvert near Interstate 35 just outside of Georgetown, Texas. The victim appeared to be in her 20s, having been sexually assaulted before she was strangled to death. It seemed likely she was murdered that day, and the only unique clue to her identity was a silver, oval-shaped ring on her hand. Her body was nude, except for the only article of clothing she had on, a pair of orange socks. Since the young woman was never identified, orange socks would become a nickname of sorts for the victim. Years later, serial killer Henry Lee Lucas confessed to the murder of orange socks. He even stated that he had had sex with her corpse after she was dead. However, Lucas did not know the woman's identity. He claimed he picked her up while hitchhiking and only remembered that her name was Joni or Judy. After being sentenced to death for the woman's murder in 1984, Lucas recanted his confession in order to have his sentence commuted. Indeed, further investigation showed that Lucas was likely working in Florida on the day of the murder. Lucas was notorious for frequently confessing to murders he never committed, and no one is sure how many people he actually killed. Henry Lee Lucas died in prison in 2001, but orange socks is not the only unidentified murder victim that he has been connected to. The mysterious death of Chris Jenkins. Chris Jenkins was a 21-year-old student from the University of Minnesota who visited a downtown Minneapolis bar on Halloween night in 2002. After leaving the bar sometime around midnight, Chris would vanish without a trace. He remained a missing person for 4 months until his body was discovered in the Mississippi River. Since Chris was still wearing his Halloween costume, all indications were that he died shortly after he disappeared. Chris had been heavily intoxicated that night, and since his cause of death was determined to be drowning, authorities initially believed it was an accident or suicide. His parents refused to believe this and pressed for a more thorough investigation. Finally, in 2006, the death was reclassified as a homicide. While authorities have withheld specific details, they've claimed that an incarcerated suspect told them he was present when Chris was murdered and thrown off a bridge into the river. Even though police believe this man's story to be credible, no charges have ever been filed. However, one possible theory is that Chris Jenkins could have been a victim in the mysterious smiley face murders. During this time period, approximately 40 male college students in the United States fell victim in a bizarre series of drowning deaths. In some of these cases, unexplained smiley face graffiti was found near the body of water where the victim drowned. This has led some to theorize these deaths are connected and that the victims were drugged before being thrown into a body of water to make their murder look like an accidental drowning. While no smiley face graffiti was ever found in connection to Chris Jenkins' death, investigators cannot overlook its similarities to many other unsolved cases. The disappearance of Hyun-Jung Cindy Song. Hyun-Jung Song, or Cindy Song, was a 21-year-old South Korean student attending Pennsylvania State University. In 2001, dressed in a bunny costume, she attended a Halloween party at a nightclub in State College. After leaving the club, Cindy spent the next few hours hanging out with her friends before she was dropped off at her apartment very early in the morning. This was the last anyone would ever see of her. After Cindy was reported missing, a search was conducted of her apartment. There were no signs of struggle, but many of her belongings were strewn about, including aspects of her costume, indicating that she may have gone inside after being dropped off. What happened to her afterwards? Shortly thereafter, a witness reported seeing a woman resembling Cindy in the Chinatown district of Philadelphia. This woman was inside a vehicle with an unidentified male and was crying out for help. A bizarre lead came out 2 years later when a man in Luzerne County named Hugo Marcus Selinski was arrested upon finding the remains of 5 bodies, all buried in his backyard. Even though none of these remains belonged to Cindy, an informant told police that Selinski and an accomplice named Michael Jason Kurkowski Jr. had abducted her. After Cindy was raped and murdered, the 2 men allegedly buried her body at another location. Kurkowski's remains were found in Selinski's backyard, and the informant claimed Kurkowski was murdered for keeping Cindy's bunny ears as a souvenir. So far, no evidence has been discovered that could tie Selinski to Cindy's disappearance, though in January 2014, the burned remains of a dozen more people were found buried at his property. As of right now, we still do not know if any of them will be identified as Cindy Song. The disappearance of Stephen Damon. On Halloween in 1955, Marilyn Damon took her 2-year-old son, Stephen, and 7-month-old daughter, Pamela, to a supermarket in East Meadow, New York. While she went shopping, Marilyn let Stephen wait outside the store with his sister, who was inside a carriage. 10 minutes later, Marilyn exited the store and was shocked to discover that both Stephen and the carriage were gone. Shortly thereafter, the carriage was discovered about 1.5 blocks away. However, even though Pamela had been left behind inside the carriage, Stephen was nowhere to be found. He has not been seen since. In many cases where infants are abducted, it's theorized that the perpetrator wanted a child of their own and decided to raise the missing infant under a new name. Over the years, DNA testing has been utilized in an attempt to determine if Stephen Damon was ever given a new identity. At one point, investigators noticed that Stephen bore a resemblance to the infamous boy in the box, an unidentified child who was found murdered inside a cardboard box in Philadelphia in 1957, and a story we looked into in more detail in a previous video. However, DNA testing would eventually confirm that Stephen and the boy in the box were not the same person. In 2009, a Michigan man named John Barnes came forward believing he might be Stephen, but DNA testing also ruled this out. It's possible an adult Stephen Damon might be living another life somewhere else under a different identity, unaware that he was once taken from his real family. However, his whereabouts continue to remain unknown. Tell me in the comments section, do you have any theories about any of these mysteries? If you find it mysterious, then share and like this video. Also be sure to subscribe, because you really don't want to miss what is coming next. As always, thank you for watching.